Mom isn't dead. Mom is in the trash. Laura's words shocked the classroom. In a fifth-grade class at St. Anne's Elementary School, the world simulated a fragile normalcy, a collective lie as thin as the film of dust on the windowsill. Laura Thompson slipped into her assigned seat, a movement so discreet it seemed to want to erase her own physical presence from the room. She had become a ghost haunting a place that, for everyone else, buzzed with the carefree, cacophonous energy of childhood. Her pencil, not held but strangled in a fist so tight her knuckles gleamed waxy white, moved with terrifying autonomy across a blank page in her notebook. It formed no words, no numbers, no smiling suns and disproportionate houses of the other children. No, her pencil etched jagged, frantic lines that gouged the paper like claw marks, a physical manifestation of the panic screaming within her. From this chaos emerged dark, devouring shapes, images that imposed themselves on her unbidden. A house with no windows and no door, a monolith of despair, a locked door barred with thick, rusted chains, and again, the silhouette of a woman, curled up in an anatomically impossible way inside a box barely larger than a shoebox. The air in the classroom, for Laura, was not neutral. It was thick, viscous, an invisible molasses that pressed in on her from all sides, making each breath laborious, as if she were breathing underwater. Across the room, behind the barricade of her desk covered with papers and a cheerfully painted flower pot, her teacher, Clara Evans, watched her. A familiar ache, a mix of worry and helplessness, bloomed again in her chest, a slow, insidious poison. Clara, a woman whose 30s were marked by eyes that held a deep well of kindness and a cascade of dark, untamed curls that seemed to mirror her own restless spirit, felt the weight of Laura's silence not as an absence, but as an overwhelming presence, a silent scream that echoed through the room. She had known Maria Garcia, who became Maria Thompson, since the heady, carefree days of college, nearly 2 decades ago. Their friendship wasn't a passing acquaintance. It was a vibrant tapestry, a work of art woven from the golden threads of late-night study sessions, fueled by cold pizza, ambition, and the shared conviction that they could remake the world. They had shared cheap bottles of wine, dissecting philosophy in their wildest dreams, whispered 3 a.m. confidences about heartbreaks, and that fierce longing for a life bigger, bolder than Eldridge seemed to offer. Maria had been a firecracker, a supernova of wit, vivacity, and a fierce, tenacious independence. Clara remembered her laugh, a rich, contagious sound that could fill a room and silence doubts. As a single mother, Maria had transformed into a whirlwind of energy, struggling, fighting, and laughing through exhaustion to build a beautiful, safe world for Laura, a world filled with stacks of library books, impromptu picnics by the Rio Chama, and bedtime stories read in voices so dramatic they made the cat jump. Then Andre Thompson had entered their lives, not quietly, but like a sudden, blinding ray of sunshine that eclipsed everything else. And Clara, with the keen, instinctively protective eye of a devoted friend, had watched the changes, subtle at first, then insidious. She was a seismologist of friendship, noting the microfractures in the facade. She saw the way Maria's bright, genuine smile became a forced gesture, a practiced rictus at school events, a performance that never quite reached the warmth of her eyes. She saw the flinch, almost imperceptible to an untrained eye, when Andre's large hand rested with casual possessiveness on Maria's shoulder, a gesture the whole town interpreted as affection, but which made Maria stiffen, if only for a second, like an animal sensing the trap closing. She noticed how Maria's vibrant wardrobe, a rainbow of flowing skirts and bright colors that reflected her personality, gradually transformed into a uniform of practical pants and soft sweaters, neutral, subdued colors that Andre deemed more appropriate, more classy. To the rest of Eldridge, Andre was a modern-day saint, a paragon of virtue. Incredibly handsome, with features chiseled like a Roman statue and eyes the color of mountain lake ice, He possessed a disarming smile, a weapon of mass charm that could melt the hardest hearts. He was the volunteer fire chief, the first to sprint towards swirling smoke. He was the guy who showed up unasked on a Saturday morning with his toolbox to fix old Mrs. Gable's leaky faucet, refusing any payment beyond a cup of coffee and a slice of her famous apple pie. He organized charity drives, coached the Little League baseball team, and remembered not just everyone's name, but their children's names and their dogs' names too. But Clara, looking beyond that heroic, polished veneer, saw something else. In quiet moments, she saw the reflection of something cold, empty, and calculating in his pale eyes. She saw the unsettling stillness that would come over him when he watched Maria move through a room. It wasn't the gaze of love, but the concentrated, unnerving intensity of a hawk tracking a field mouse, assessing, waiting. Laura, Clara's voice was a soft whisper, a verbal lifeline cast into the girl's ocean of silence. She had moved silently to lean deliberately close to the desk, creating a bubble of intimacy, eliminating any sense of looming authority. Laura's hand froze mid-stroke of a particularly violent line, and the graphite tip, under unbearable pressure, snapped against the paper with a small, sharp sound, a dry click that seemed deafening to Clara. Laura's knuckles turned bone-white around the broken pencil stub. "You've been terribly quiet today," Clara continued gently, her voice a caress, keeping her gaze steady, trying to project an island of calm and safety into the child's inner storm. "Is everything all right? Is there something bothering you? Mom isn't dead. She's in a trash can." The words weren't shouted. They escaped Laura's mouth, a hoarse, hurried whisper, but laden with a truth so heavy and unbearable it seemed to distort the air around her. It vibrated in the classroom, cutting through the faint hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant murmur of other students. She couldn't, dared not, meet Clara's eyes. Hers remained fixed, as if hypnotized, on the dark, chaotic lines devouring the blank page, a menacing vortex to swallow her, a broken woman in a box too small. It was this truth that consumed her. The outside world, the adult world, had been fed a simple, packaged, digestible lie, wrapped in the respectable shroud of tragedy. Maria Thompson had died in a car accident. A sudden, violent twist of fate on a rain-slicked highway near Taos. Her stepfather, the hero Andre, had himself delivered the eulogy in St. Michael's Chapel, his voice thick with a grief so raw, so palpable and convincing it had made the entire town sob. Hardened ranchers with calloused hands, stoic shopkeepers, even old Mrs. Henderson, who boasted she hadn't shed a tear since her husband died, all had wept with him. He spoke of Maria's bright laugh, her unconditional love for Laura, her sudden, cruel absence that left a gaping void in their lives and in the community. He painted an idyllic picture of a loving family, shattered by random, senseless bad luck. But Laura had seen. She had been a witness, a silent, invisible, frozen witness, crouched in the suffocating, stifling darkness of her closet, the smell of mothballs and cedar mingling with her own fear. She had held her breath until her lungs screamed, until black spots danced before her eyes. She was the only witness to the real story, a horror that had unfolded not on a distant highway, but in the supposed sanctuary of their own home on Juniper Street. She had heard the voices escalate, first tense whispers, then desperate, muffled cries from her mother, pleas that had turned into gurgles, a liquid, horrible sound, a sound of life extinguishing that now replayed on a loop, deafening, in her skull, drowning out the bird's song, the teacher's voice, the very beat of her own blood in her ears. She had seen, through the crack in the closet door, Andre's face illuminated by the faint hallway light as he emerged from the master bedroom. His face was not contorted with rage, not twisted with passion. It was chillingly calm, a blank canvas utterly devoid of anything human, a mask of cold, clinical, efficient precision. It was the face of a man who had completed a task. Then she had heard the sound, a disgusting, plastic sound, the rustle of the heavy-duty black trash bags he methodically unrolled from a box in the garage. The sound echoed in the silence of the night like tearing flesh, as he strove to erase, to contain, to nullify her mother's very existence. Clara's heart clenched so tightly it took her breath away. She knew, intellectually, that grief could carve a chasm in a child, leaving them apathetic and withdrawn. But Laura's silence was of a different nature. It wasn't empty, it was full of sharp, brittle terror, a terror that seemed strangely, horribly adult. It wasn't the absence of sound. It was the presence of a scream held back by pure, primal, paralyzing fear. "You know you can talk to me, don't you?" Clara pressed, her voice a low, steady current, an anchor in the churning sea. "About anything. Anything that's bothering you, or making you sad, or scared. I'm here. I'll always listen." Laura's eyes remained fixed on the jagged drawing, a prison of graphite on paper. Her lips pressed into a line so thin and bloodless they seemed to disappear. A wall, invisible but impenetrable and absolute. A wall built brick by brick of fear and a desperate instinct for self-preservation, stood between them, taller and more impassable than the Sangre de Cristos mountains that dominated the town's horizon. Clara felt its cold, smooth surface. She withdrew slowly, understanding that pushing further would be to hit that wall head-on, which would only terrify the girl more, perhaps pushing her beyond an invisible, dangerous edge. But as she straightened, she made a silent, solemn vow, an oath that resonated deep in her bones. "I will not let this go. For Maria, for you, Laura." That evening, the knot of terror in her stomach tightened, turning into a cold, hard fist. Clara drove her faithful old Subaru down Juniper Street. The street was quiet, almost asleep under the twilight sky. The neat, single-story house at number 17 basked in the long shadows of late afternoon, a picture so perfect of wholesome domestic bliss it was suspicious. The lawn was an unnatural, almost fluorescent green, and perfectly mowed, edged with military precision. Cheerful petunias, in shades of vivid pink and purple, overflowed from hanging baskets near the freshly painted front door. The mailbox at the roadside was a ridiculously bright, cartoonish red. It looked like a stage set, a facade built to hide the rot behind the walls. Andre opened the door at the first knock, as if he were expecting her, his face instantly lighting up with that practiced, devastating warmth that disarmed everyone. "Clara," his voice was a soft, velvety, reassuring baritone, rich with a false welcome that sounded perfectly sincere. "What a wonderful surprise. Come in, out of this heat. You're just in time. I just made a fresh pot of coffee." He stepped back, ushering her into the living room, which was so meticulously clean it was unsettling. Not a cushion was out of place, not a magazine lay around. The air inside was thick, heavy, and still, smelling faintly of lemon polish and something else. A cloying pine air freshener that seemed desperately to want to mask a deeper, more organic, unidentifiable odor. It was the kind of deep, heavy silence that follows a terrible, soul-shattering scream, a silence that pressed on the eardrums. His eyes, however, for a split second, as he turned to go to the kitchen, passed her to land on Laura. The girl was sitting bolt upright on the living room sofa, stiff as a board, a frightened bird waiting for the hawk. Her knees were drawn defensively to her chest, her arms wrapped tightly around them like a shield. She clutched Mr. Hoppity, her stuffed rabbit worn by years and tears, in a death grip, her white knuckles contrasting with the faded brown fur. She didn't look up. "I just wanted to check on Laura," Clara said, forcing a smile that felt brittle and artificial onto her lips, a mask to hide her own growing unease. She kept her voice light, almost playful. "She's been very withdrawn at school lately. Quieter than usual. I was just a little worried." She deliberately avoided the words sad, scared, or angry. Andre sighed, a masterful, Oscar-worthy performance of tired, overwhelmed fatherhood. He ran a hand through his dark, perfectly coiffed hair, a gesture calculated to appear spontaneous. "It's been difficult, Clara. So difficult." losing Maria so suddenly, so violently. It's been a terrible shock for both of us." He lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper, leaning slightly towards her, invading her personal space with an intimacy that felt both alluring and menacing. Her imagination, it's run wild. She's having nightmares, horrible dreams. Grief does strange things to children, the therapists say. It distorts reality, mixes memories and fears. He shook his head, his expression a mask of pain and concern. "I'm seriously thinking of getting her a counselor, someone professional, to help her deal with these fantasies she's having. It's absolutely heartbreaking to see her so troubled by things that never happened, things she's making up to try and make sense of what doesn't make sense." Clara nodded, a cold terror prickling her skin like thousands of icy needles. Fantasies. The word hung in the lemon-scented air, venomous and sharp. As he spoke, Laura's eyes, huge and dark with terror, met Clara's across the room. It wasn't a mere glance. It was a fleeting, desperate look, a silent, anguished cry for help, a plea etched in pure fear, before her gaze instantly dropped back to the worn fur of a rabbit, as if eye contact had burned her. Clara felt that message not with her mind, but with her gut, a physical shock that twisted her stomach. She made conversation for a few more minutes, unbearable minutes of small talk, accepted the cup of coffee she didn't want and barely let touch her lips, and left the house with a hollow promise to return soon. The moment the door clicked shut behind her, the knot in her stomach turned into a nauseating, swirling certainty that settled like lead. Something is terribly, monstrously wrong. The days that followed blurred into weeks, each sunrise bringing a new layer to the fortress of silence that walled Laura in. At school, she became an island, a solitary anomaly adrift in a sea of boisterous children's chatter and laughter. She actively avoided her old friends, her movements becoming hesitant and fearful, as if she expected a blow at any moment. Recess, once a time of joy and running, was now spent staring fixedly at the chain-link fence that separated the playground from the vacant lot beyond, her back turned to the shouts, ball games, and invitations to play. Her lunch tray, day after day, remained virtually untouched, the food congealing and cooling under the fluorescent cafeteria lights. Her drawings, which had started as ignored scribbles, began to draw worried glances and whispers from other students. They became darker, more desperate, executed with a frantic energy that chilled Clara's blood. Charcoal nightmares, smeared and violent, emerged from her notebook. The woman in the box, her mouth now a gaping black hole in a silent scream. The man's silhouette, larger now, with hollow eyes that seemed to follow the viewer wherever they were in the room. A forest of bare, leafless trees, their branches like skeletal, clawed hands lacerating a bruised, purple sky. Then the bruises, tangible, silent evidence, began to appear. First faint bluish smudges, almost shadows, on the pale skin of her forearms, like fingerprints left by careless giants. She tried to hide them, instinctively pulling down the long sleeves of her sweaters, even when the New Mexico sun beat down with relentless heat, making her cheeks flush and sweat bead on her forehead. She claimed the classroom was cold, that she had chills. Clara watched, each new mark a painful beat of her heart against her ribs. One damp morning, as the low, gray sky weighed down on the town, Laura clumsily dropped a book. As she bent to pick it up, her sleeve rode up, revealing a fresh, distinct, undeniable mark on her bicep, a perfect oval of deep purple, the exact shape and size of a thumbprint exerted with considerable force. Clara acted on pure instinct, professional thought giving way to a protective impulse. In a quiet moment, as the class worked on math problems, the only sound the scratching of pencils, she knelt by Laura's desk. "Honey," she murmured, her voice barely audible, but thick with a worry that choked her. Gently, with infinite caution, as if the skin might break under her touch, she grazed the edge of the bruise. "What happened here?" Laura snatched her arm back as if she had been burned by acid, her whole body recoiling in her chair, which scraped on the linoleum. I fell off my bike. The words burst out, too loud, too fast, into the silent room, startling nearby students who looked up. Her voice was flat, monotone, devoid of inflection, a memorized phrase, a line of dialogue delivered without conviction. Yesterday, near the ditch, it was an accident. She yanked her sleeve violently to cover the evidence, her eyes fixed on her math textbook, stubbornly refusing to meet Clara's gaze. Clara didn't believe her for a second. The excuse was too quick, too rehearsed, a tape played on demand. It was devoid of the natural embarrassment or elaboration a child would normally offer. She knew that confronting her directly, insisting, would only slam the door even harder, pushing Laura further into the suffocating, protective silence Andrei demanded. Instead, a cold, steel-hard resolve solidified within her. She couldn't rely on Laura to speak, or on Andrei to confess, or on the system to see. She had to act alone. She began her own secret, meticulous investigation. In a locked drawer of her old oak desk at the back of the classroom, hidden under piles of lesson plans and old report cards, she started a file. A simple manila folder that would become the receptacle for her growing fear. It began with dated notes, written in a trembling hand. September 14th, withdrawn. Didn't eat lunch. Drawing, black box, figure inside. September 18th, slight bruise left forearm. Said she bumped desk. Seemed rehearsed. She began to surreptitiously photograph the increasingly disturbing drawings with her phone when the girl's back was turned. She kept precise, almost clinical records. October 2nd, bruise right forearm, upper part. Circular shape. Wearing long sleeves despite heat, 29 degrees Celsius. October 5th, drawing, man with hollow eyes looks bigger. Visible trembling during silent reading time. The file grew, page after damning page, a silent testament to the horror the child was experiencing. Armed with this file, which seemed to weigh a ton in her hands, she brought her growing concern to the principal, Mr. Hargrove, a bald man in his 50s whose main value seemed to be the preservation of Eldridge's harmonious, falsely idyllic Norman Rockwell facade. In his office, which smelled of stale coffee and polished wood, she spread the evidence on his mahogany desk. The photos of the drawings, the dated notes, the bruise log. Bill, I am deeply, deeply concerned. Laura Thompson is showing all the classic signs of trauma and possible abuse. Her drawings, her withdrawal, these recurring injuries. It's not normal. Hargrove leaned back in his leather chair, which groaned in protest, lacing his fingers over his stomach, the embodiment of condescending authority. He barely glanced at the file, waving it away like a nuisance. Clara, Clara, he sighed, his voice heavy with weary patience, as if addressing an overzealous, hysterical employee. Andrei Thompson is a good man, a pillar of our community, a hero. He's been through absolute hell, losing Maria like that. All of us have. He gestured vaguely towards the quiet street outside the window. Let's not create problems where there aren't any. Eldridge doesn't need this kind of drama. We need concrete evidence, Clara, solid proof. Not just, well, a teacher's intuition and some child's scribbles. Kids draw strange things. They get bruises playing. It's their nature. Clara's jaw clenched so hard she felt a searing pain. A flash of pure, white-hot anger pierced through the fog of her fear. I'm not creating anything, Bill. I'm documenting deeply disturbing signs concerning a child I believe is in grave danger. Look at this. She tapped the photo of the man with hollow eyes, the drawing so violent it seemed to vibrate. Look at the bruise log. Fell off her bike 3 times in 2 weeks, each time with bruises that look like grips. Since when does Laura even ride a bike to school? Andrei drives her to and from every day. Hargrove sighed again, the sound of a man deeply inconvenienced by a reality that threatened to disrupt his tranquility. All right. I hear you. Your concern is noted. He closed the file with a dismissive final gesture. I'll look into it. I'll talk to Andrei, see how he's coping, mention the school's concerns about Laura's adjustment difficulties. Discreetly, of course. Clara left his office, feeling utterly and completely alone, the cold, institutional indifference physically weighing on her like a lead shroud. The burden of Laura's safety, and now, of Maria's memory, settled directly and terrifyingly on her sole shoulders. Hargrove's look into it was a bureaucratic dead end, an empty promise designed to silence her. She knew it. At home, Laura lived in a meticulously maintained prison. The omnipresent smell of lemon polish, the pristine surfaces that gleamed under the light, the oppressive silence. All of it seemed to be just a thin veneer, a fresh coat of paint over a structure rotting from within. Andre's dazzling public charm was merely a mask, a costume he donned as he walked out the door. Behind the heavy, closed door of 17 Juniper Street, he was a cloud of silent menace, a coiled spring of potential violence held back only by his obsessive need for control. He watched her for long periods, hours sometimes, sitting silently in his leather armchair while she pretended to read or draw, his cold, calculating eyes seeming to dissect her, to peer directly into her soul, assessing her compliance, looking for the slightest sign, the smallest crack, the faintest flicker of betrayal. His voice, when he finally spoke to her, was never loud, but low, cutting, a razor blade devoid of all warmth, each word a stone carefully placed in the wall of menace that imprisoned her. "You're a good girl, aren't you, Laura?" he would ask, his large hand resting heavily, possessively, on her shoulder, fingers digging in just enough to remind her of his strength, to make her shiver internally. "Quiet, obedient. You don't tell anyone at school those silly little stories you have in your head, do you? You don't make anything up? Because liars, Laura, liars end up in very big trouble." Laura would shake her head in silence, her throat constricted with terror, a lump so big and hard she couldn't have spoken even if she had dared. She knew, with the primitive, absolute certainty of a hunted animal, that one wrong word, one flicker of defiance in her eyes, could unleash the monster she had seen that night. The calm, efficient monster capable of silencing her mother forever. Sleep offered no sanctuary, no escape. It was just another form of torture. She would lie awake for endless hours in the suffocating darkness of her room, clutching Mr. Hoppity so tightly the stuffing threatened to burst from the worn seams. Her small body was stiff as a board, every muscle tense, in a state of permanent alert. She replayed the horrible soundtrack etched into her auditory memory. The initial muffled argument, her mother's words growing more and more pleading. The sharp crack, like a breaking branch, that had brought her mother's protest to an abrupt halt. Then the other sounds, the wet, dull, sickening thuds of fists against flesh. And finally, the agonizing, slow creak of floorboards just outside her closet door as Andre dragged Maria's heavy, inert, limp-bodied down the hallway and into the echoing void of the garage. The memory was so vivid, so visceral, she could almost feel the vibration of his footsteps through the floor, almost smell the acrid scent of his sweat mingled with that metallic, pungent odor she now forever associated with the garage. She wanted to scream until her voice broke, until her lungs burned. She wanted to run barefoot into the cool, desert night and never, ever look back. To tell Mrs. Gable, to tell the police officer directing traffic outside the school, to tell everyone the terrible, monstrous truth. But the crushing weight of disbelief held her down. Who would believe her against him? Andre was Eldridge's golden boy, the town hero, the man who fixed faucets and rescued kittens from trees. She was just a grieving little girl with an overactive imagination, a traumatized child easily discredited, easily dismissed, and, she knew with chilling certainty, easily silenced forever. Clara's worry festered, metastasizing into a consuming obsession that left her little room for sleep, food, or peace. Her own nights became a haunted hunting ground of Laura's vivid charcoal nightmares, of the ghostly purple prints on her thin arms, of the bottomless well of fear in her eyes that mirrored the terror Clara had sometimes glimpsed in Maria herself during those last tense months. She felt as if she was failing Maria a second time, having not seen the danger the first time and not acting fast enough now. Her evenings, once spent grading papers or reading for pleasure, were now consumed by a frantic, almost desperate quest for answers, for the smallest crack in Andre's armor. She became a nocturnal detective, her small, book-filled living room transformed into an investigative headquarters. She spent hours on the phone, her voice low and urgent, tracking down Maria's scattered friends, her college friends, her former colleagues at the Eldridge Public Library, anyone who might have seen something, anything. A crucial breakthrough came during a discreet, almost clandestine meeting with Sarah Jenkins, the head librarian who had been Maria's closest colleague and confidant. They met at the Highway Diner, an anonymous eatery 20 miles outside Eldridge, one of those places with sticky vinyl booze and weak coffee that guaranteed anonymity. Under the flickering neon light that buzzed above their table, Sarah confided what she had kept bottled up out of fear and uncertainty, her voice trembling as she shredded a paper napkin into tiny pieces. She was terrified, Clara. Really, deeply terrified. These last few months, Sarah whispered, her eyes nervously scanning the almost empty diner. She told me he was becoming incredibly controlling. He was constantly checking her phone, reading her messages, demanding to know who she was talking to, where she had been. He would show up unexpectedly at the library for no reason and just stand there, watching her work from the end of an aisle. He'd say he wanted to take her to lunch, but it felt like surveillance. She was saving money, Clara. Cash. She was hiding it in an old shoebox at the back of her locker here. She was trying to find a way to leave with Laura without him knowing. She was making plans. She was looking at apartments in Santa Fe. Another friend, Elena Rodriguez, who had moved to Albuquerque a year earlier, recalled an even more troubling pattern during a tearful late-night phone call. It was the phone calls, Clara, Elena said, her voice on the phone thick with retrospective dread. Late at night, sometimes 2, 3 in the morning. In person, he was so sweet, so charming, everyone's best friend. But Maria told me, when he called like that, his voice was completely different. Poisonous. Cold as death. He would demand to know where she was, who she was with, accuse her of things, horrible, degrading things. She would tremble all over when she hung up. Elena paused, her breath catching in a choked sob. And she said he would fly into terrifying rages over the smallest things. A plate left on the counter. Laura forgetting to put away a toy. One time, it was because Maria bought the wrong brand of coffee. He wouldn't hit her, but he would punch walls, throw things across the room. Then, an hour later, he'd be gentle as a lamb, apologizing, crying, as if nothing had happened. She called it walking on glass eggshells. She was afraid that one day, the glass would break under her feet. Clara scribbled every detail, every name, every date mentioned, into a dedicated notebook, her hands trembling not only with fear now, but with a fierce, cold, righteous vindication. She wasn't crazy. Her instincts hadn't misled her. The monster was real. The charming facade was just camouflage for a predator. Maria had known. Maria had tried to escape, and Andre had stopped her, permanently. One gray, oppressive afternoon, as the sky was a layer of low, leaden clouds pressing down on Eldridge, the carefully constructed dam of Laura's silence finally broke, not in an explosion, but in a slow, painful crack. The classroom was quiet, the air filled only with the soft rustle of turning pages during individual reading time. Clara was putting away art supplies on the shelves at the back of the room, her mind turning Elena's words over and over like sharp stones, when she felt a small tap, so light and hesitant she first thought she'd imagined it, on her elbow. She turned, paintbrush in hand, to find Laura standing there, motionless. The girl's face was ashen, drained of all color, her small hands twisting the hem of her faded t-shirt into a knot so tight the fabric was white. Her eyes, huge and dark in her pale face, held a terror so profound, so abyssal, it took Clara's breath away. "Mrs. Clara," Laura whispered, her voice trembling so violently the words vibrated in the air, barely audible above the constant hum of the fluorescent lights. My mom. She swallowed convulsively, her throat working to force the words out. She didn't die in a car accident. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The plastic container full of paint brushes slipped from Clara's suddenly numb, useless fingers and clattered loudly onto the linoleum floor, scattering brushes in all directions like twigs fallen in a storm. The sound echoed in the sudden, charged silence of the classroom. A few heads rose curiously, then returned to their books. Clara ignored them. She dropped to her knees, an instinctive gesture to get to Laura's level, her heart beating against her ribs like a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She reached out, slowly, carefully, not wanting to frighten the wounded creature before her, and took Laura's icy hands in hers. "What do you mean, darling?" she asked, her own voice a strained whisper, as she braced herself for the worst. "Tell me. I'm here. Tell me everything." Laura's breath hitched, a raw, broken sound like something tearing inside. The tears she had held back for months, weeks, an eternity of fear, finally broke free, not in noisy sobs, but flowing down her pale cheeks in warm, silent streams that carved furrows in the dust of accumulated fear. Her small body began to tremble, first slightly, then uncontrollably. "She's in a trash can," she choked out, the words thick with unimaginable horror and grief. "I saw him. I saw Andre. He hurt her. A lot. In their bedroom." Her voice, freed from the dam, gained terrifying momentum, words pouring out in a raw, ragged torrent, a litany of memorized horror. "I woke up. I heard Mom crying. She was saying, 'Stop. Please, Andre, you're hurting me. Stop.' Then there was a loud crack, and she just stopped. She stopped making noise." Laura's eyes were wide, glassy, fixed not on Clara, but on the memory replaying in high definition before her. He came out of the bedroom. He looked empty, not angry, just done, like he just put something away. Then he took the big black bags from the garage, the heavy-duty trash bags, the ones that make a lot of noise when you open them. I heard them rustle tear. He put Mom inside. A violent, heartbreaking sob shook her entire body. He dragged her down the hall to the garage. Her feet, they didn't have shoes on, they bumped on the wooden floor, thump, 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 with every step. She mimicked the sound with a horrible little tap of her small fist against her own leg, a gesture of chilling precision. In the morning, he came into my room. He sat on my bed, he smelled like bleach, and he said Mom had gone on a trip. He said she wouldn't come back. He said, Laura's voice dropped to a barely audible whisper, a terrified confession, her eyes finally fixing on Clara's with desperate intensity. He said if I told anyone, he'd put me in the trash too. He said he'd make me disappear like he made Mom disappear. The last words tore from her in a raw breath, and Laura collapsed completely, falling into Clara's arms, her small body convulsing with the force of her sobs, years of terror, grief, and loneliness finally bursting to the surface. Clara held her tight, rocking her gently back and forth, her own tears flowing unrestrained, warm and salty, into Laura's tangled brown hair. A fierce protective fire, white-hot and incandescent, ignited in Clara's chest, a fire that burned away the last vestiges of doubt, fear, and hesitation. "You," she whispered fiercely, her voice thick with tears but carried by a new, unwavering resolve, "are the bravest, strongest girl I have ever known. I believe you, Laura. I believe every word, and we're going to fix this. I promise you all my life. He will never hurt you again. Never." That evening, Clara sat at her kitchen table, the raw yellow light of the overhead fixture mercilessly illuminating Laura's exhausted, tear-streaked face. The child had finally fallen asleep on the living room sofa, a creature worn out by her own bravery. Mr. Hoppity still clutched to her, wrapped in an old Afghan throw. Clara picked up the phone, her hand trembling only slightly now, the tremor of adrenaline replaced by a steel core of resolve. She called the Eldridge Police Department, and when the dispatcher answered, she bypassed the greeting, asking in a firm, unyielding voice to speak directly to a detective. After a wait that seemed an eternity, Detective Mateo Ruiz picked up the line, his voice weary, the voice of a man accustomed to the domestic disputes and petty larceny that made up small-town life. Clara spoke. She spoke in a clear, concise voice, a voice that was an iron rod despite the fear that still gnawed at the edges of her consciousness. She recounted Laura's harrowing narrative, word for word, with the precision of a recorder. She then detailed her own observations, turning her personal file into damning testimony. Laura's deep withdrawal, the disturbing drawings, she described them with a vividness that made Ruiz shiver. The meticulously logged bruise pattern, and finally, the deeply concerning statements from Maria's friends regarding Andre's increasingly controlling behavior and Maria's secret plans to flee. She presented this not as intuition, but as a coherent, terrifying narrative of murder, cover-up, and child endangerment. Ruiz listened in silence, the line crackling occasionally. On the other end, Clara heard the steady scratch of a pen on paper. Then came the long pause, a pause heavy with the institutional skepticism she had dreaded. "Laura Thompson," Ruiz finally said, and his tone was not just incredulous, it was almost offended. "The volunteer fire chief? Mrs. Evans, do you realize this is an extraordinarily serious accusation against a very respected, even beloved, member of this community, a decorated volunteer, the Chamber of Commerce Man of the Year last year." Clara's grip tightened on the plastic receiver until her knuckles whitened and the plastic creaked. "I am perfectly aware of the gravity of the situation, Detective Ruiz. I am also aware that a child in my care, a child who was the eyewitness to her mother's murder, is currently living in the home of the man who committed it and who has threatened to kill her too if she speaks. So, with all due respect, I am asking you to do your job." Her voice didn't rise. It sharpened, each word a chisel stroke, precise and merciless. Ruiz, visibly taken aback, promised in a voice devoid of any sense of urgency to look into the matter, to open a preliminary investigation. He mentioned the need to formally interview Laura, to speak to Andre, to get both sides of the story. Clara hung up, the cold dread returning in full force. She knew Ruiz's investigation would be superficial, a formality conducted with reluctance and easily swayed by Andre's legendary charm. It wouldn't be enough. Far, far from it. The next morning, true to their word but radiating palpable reluctance, Detective Ruiz and his older partner, Detective Frank Martinez, a paunchy man with a permanent cynical eye squint and a coffee stain on his tie, arrived at St. Anne's. They sat, or rather slouched, on the uncomfortable plastic chairs in Mr. Hargrove's cramped office, the air thick with tension and the principal's palpable, visible sweat. Laura, clutching Clara's hand as if it were the only solid, real thing in a dissolving world, repeated her story. Clara had gently prepared her, assuring her she only had to tell the truth, again and again. Laura's voice was small, a thin trickle in the silent room, but to Clara's immense and growing pride, it was unwavering. She didn't stumble over words. She didn't embellish details. She didn't cry this time. She simply stated the horrific facts, her gaze fixed on a scuff mark on Hargrove's cluttered desk. Ruiz's expression slowly shifted from polite skepticism to a worried frown, a flicker of genuine empathy finally surfacing in his eyes as the child spoke of dragging sounds and the bleached threat. Martinez, however, remained impassive, arms crossed over his chest, his face a fortress of disbelief. When Laura finished, he leaned forward, completely ignoring the child and addressing Clara directly, his voice dripping with paternalistic condescension. "Children," he stated flatly, as if enunciating a law of physics, "get confused, especially after a traumatic loss like a parent. Real memories get mixed up with nightmares. They see things on TV, in movies, they hear stories, their minds are just trying to fill in the blanks." Clara bristled, her protective instincts flaring like a shield. "Detective Martinez, Laura is not confused. She is recounting a specific, traumatic event with terrifying clarity and sensory detail. She is terrified, and rightly so, of the man she lives with. Look at this. She slid the thick file, the photographs of the drawings, the dated notes, the bruise log, the summaries of Sarah and Elena's statements, across the desk towards him. This isn't confusion. This is evidence of profound trauma and ongoing abuse. Do something, please, before it's too late. The two detectives exchanged a long, silent glance, a nonverbal communication that spoke volumes about bureaucratic inertia, small-town politics, and deep-seated disbelief. Ruiz sighed, a sound of exhaustion. We'll go talk to Mr. Thompson, see what he has to say about it. Clara's stomach clenched so violently she nearly gagged. She knew precisely, how that conversation would go. In the immaculate Juniper Street house, Andre gave a virtuoso performance, a masterpiece of wounded innocence and paternal solicitude. He greeted the detectives not with suspicion, but with apparent openness and sadness, offering them freshly brewed coffee in delicate porcelain cups. His eyes misted at the right moments as he spoke of his beloved Maria and her tragic, senseless accident that shattered my life. He spoke with poignant gravity of Laura's profound grief, her disturbing and very graphic nightmares, her tendency, since the accident, to make up stories for attention. She's struggled so much, he sighed, running a hand through his perfect hair, the very picture of the overwhelmed, grieving single father. These horrible stories she's telling about me hurting Maria, hurting her, it's absolutely heartbreaking, devastating. I'm her father. All I want is what's best for her. I'm trying to get her help, professional help, but it's a slow process, you know? Navigating the mental health system, being alone now to handle everything. The house was his silent witness, immaculate, smelling strongly of lemon polish and pine air freshener. There was no blood, no sign of struggle, not the slightest incriminating roll of black trash bags visible. When Ruiz cautiously, almost apologetically, asked if they could take a look in the garage, Andre readily agreed, with a saddened shrug. The concrete floor was spotless, obviously thoroughly cleaned, and it smelled faintly, but unmistakably, of bleach. Ah, yes, Andre said with an easy, contrite smile, gesturing to some old paint cans stacked in the corner. Had a silly little spill a while back. Old can of latex paint leaked all over. What a mess. Took me hours to get the stain out. Bleach was the only thing that worked to get it all off. The detectives left, their initial, already weak suspicions having been completely assuaged, even annihilated, by Andre's perfect charm, the immaculate house, and the perfectly plausible explanation. Their official report, filed later that day, cited insufficient circumstantial evidence to proceed at this time and noted with clinical certainty significant concerns regarding the reliability and emotional state of the child witness, likely prone to trauma-induced confabulations. Clara was incandescent with rage. She burst into Hargrove's office without knocking, slamming the police report, which she had obtained with difficulty, onto his desk with a thud that made him jump and spill his coffee. "They're letting him get away with it," she hissed, her voice trembling with a fury that threatened to consume her. "Because he's charming? Because he makes good coffee and tells a convincing lie with tears in his eyes? That man is a murderer. That girl, a child in our care, is living in a house of horrors with the man who killed her mother and who has threatened to kill her. And the police are doing nothing. Absolutely nothing. Clara, please keep your voice down." Hargrove frantically dabbed at his coffee stain with a tissue, his face flushed with embarrassment and irritation. I sincerely believe you are too close to this situation. Emotionally involved. You need to step back, to let the professionals handle it, to trust the process. But Clara couldn't step back. She wouldn't. Trusting the process meant trusting a system that had just failed spectacularly. Maria had been her soul sister. Laura was her student, and now, her charge in every way that truly mattered. She would not abandon them to bureaucratic indifference and the venomous charm of a predator. Her quest, previously a concern, became a consuming obsession, a single-minded mission that eclipsed everything else in her life. She called in sick, her absence noted with pinched disapproval by Hargrove. Her days were no longer spent teaching, but in the silent, dusty stacks of the Eldridge Public Library and the larger Santa Fe branch, her nights illuminated by the cold, bluish glow of her laptop screen as she plunged into the digital abyss of newspaper archives, cold cases, missing persons reports, and the psychology of sociopathic predators. She cross-referenced names, dates, locations, searching for a pattern, a connection, anything that could break Andre's facade. She researched landfill disposal procedures, forensic techniques for buried evidence, decomposition in anaerobic conditions. The name that finally surfaced, mentioned in an old newspaper article about a complex, initially cold case from Sandoval County, felt like a lifeline in a hostile ocean. Tom Carver, retired New Mexico State Police detective, a quiet legend, known in law enforcement circles for solving seemingly impossible cases, especially those involving missing women and monsters hiding in plain sight. She found him on a small, unassuming ranch near Santa Fe. He agreed to meet her, not at his home, but at the Dusty Spur, a quiet, dimly lit bar on the outskirts of town, one of those places that smelled of stale beer, regret, and old wood. Over 2 lukewarm beers, as the jukebox softly played a sad old country song in the corner, Clara told him the whole story, pouring out weeks of fear and frustration. Maria's disappearance, Laura's testimony, Andre's charm, the dismissive police report, the bruises, the drawings, the friends' accounts. She showed him copies of Laura's darkest drawings. Carver, a man whose face was weathered like old leather, listened intently, his expression impassive but his eyes absorbing every detail. He slowly sipped his beer, not interrupting her. When she finished, breathless and tearful, the silence stretched. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, watching the reflections. "I worked a case," he finally began, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, the sound of gravel on tin, in Sandoval County. Must be 8, maybe 9 years ago now. Young woman went missing. Waitress at a diner. Her boyfriend, a local guy, beloved by everyone, reported her missing. Cried at the police station. Said she'd run off, left a note. Nobody, absolutely nobody, suspected him. Guy was a part-time sheriff's deputy, coached youth football, helped his neighbors fix their fences. Carver took another slow, thoughtful sip. No body, no tangible evidence. Case went cold. 6 months later, a garbage man, old fellow who worked the county landfill, north of Bernalillo. He found something. A black trash bag, torn open by his bulldozer. A piece of fabric sticking out. Floral pattern. He recognized it. The young woman wore a blouse with that pattern to church sometimes. He reported it. Carver set his glass down with a soft thud and looked Clara straight in the eyes. His gaze was keen, sharp, piercing the gloom of the bar. They found her, buried 20 feet deep under compacted trash. DNA match confirmed. Boyfriend had strangled her after an argument, bagged her up, put her in her own trash can, and took her out with the weekly garbage. Those types, the charming ones, they like simple solutions. They like to use the systems we have in place against us. Sound familiar? Clara's pulse hammered in her throat, a deafening drum. It was more than familiar. It was a blueprint, a chilling modus operandi. Carver offered no false hope, but he gave her concrete advice, weapons. He gave her the names of forensic anthropologists specializing in landfill recoveries. He stressed the paramount importance of knowing the specific waste disposal schedules for Eldridge's neighborhood, and he explained the kind of pressure needed to move a reluctant police department. Not the pressure of one person, but the organized pressure of the community. Make noise, he advised, his voice hard. Noise even a deaf police chief can't ignore. Get other people involved. Mothers, grandmothers, neighbors. Make it politically and morally impossible for them to look away. Armed with Carver's advice and a renewed, steel-hard sense of determination, Clara returned to Detective Ruiz. But this time, she wasn't alone. She brought Sarah Jenkins and Elena Rodriguez, who had driven from Albuquerque. She brought 2 other women from the library who remembered Maria's flickering light and Andre's predatory gaze. And she brought Mrs. Gable, The old woman whose faucet Andre had so kindly fixed, her face now pale with shock and dawning horror as she heard Clara's full account. They formed a small but vocal and unyielding coalition, a determined group of women, standing in the cramped, dimly lit lobby of the Eldridge police station, demanding answers, refusing to be brushed off or placated with empty promises. Clara calmly presented Carver's insights into predator waste disposal, citing the Sandoval County case. The pressure was palpable, silent, but immense. Ruiz, visibly uncomfortable under the collective gaze of these women and the weight of Carver's reputation invoked like a ghost, finally relented, reluctantly agreeing to officially reopen the case for further review and verification of alternative leads. It was a bureaucratic concession, a small victory, but it was a crack in the wall of denial. The breakthrough, when it came weeks later, didn't come from brilliant police work, but from the most mundane and unexpected source. Hector Mendez, a grizzled sanitation worker near the end of his long shift at the vast, noxious Rio Grande County landfill, was guiding his enormous compactor over a section designated for Eldridge residential waste deposited at the exact time of Maria's disappearance. The smell was overwhelming, a thick miasma of decomposition, methane, and chemicals. Gulls, opportunistic scavengers, wheeled and cawed overhead. As the compactor's enormous blade churned and turned over decades-deep strata of compacted refuse, a cluster of black plastic bags, made brittle by time and exposure, ripped open. It wasn't the bags themselves that caught Hector's weary, accustomed eye. He saw thousands of them every day, but a flash of color, incongruous and vibrant against the dull, monochrome decay. A piece of brightly patterned fabric, miraculously preserved, spilling out of the torn black plastic. It was a distinctive floral pattern, vivid red poppies on a deep blue background. A pattern Hector vaguely, strangely recognized. His mind sifted through thousands of fleeting images. He'd seen it before, on a dress, worn by that nice librarian from Eldridge, Laura Thompson, when she patiently helped his own daughter find books for a school project last spring. He remembered thinking it was a pretty dress. She was wearing it the week before he heard about her accident. On an intuition, a cold, unearthly shiver running down his spine despite the crushing heat of the landfill, Hector stopped his machine and radioed him what he'd found. The news, when it reached Eldridge, wasn't a ripple. It was a seismic shockwave that cracked the town's foundations. The Rio Grande County Sheriff's Office, alerted by landfill security, swarmed the site, turning it into a crime scene. The area was cordoned off with yellow tape. Forensic technicians in sterile white suits descended into the garbage pit like grim archaeologists exploring a modern tomb. The tests were swift and brutal in their confirmation. The fabric was stained with old, degraded blood. The DNA extracted, though damaged, was a perfect, irrefutable match to Laura Thompson's reference samples. Detectives Ruiz and Martinez, their faces now grim and stripped of all skepticism, returned to 17 Juniper Street. This time, they came not for a polite discussion, but with a search warrant and a full team of crime scene technicians. The immaculate facade of the house, once a picture of perfection, now seemed sinister, a whitewashed tomb. Andre opened the door, his practiced charm instantly evaporating like water on a hot plate when he saw the warrant in Ruiz's hand. His face transformed, shifting from the mask of the kindly neighbor to a snarl of pure, animal panic that distorted his handsome features into something ugly and primal. What is this? This is outrageous. You have no right. My lawyer will be absolutely delighted to speak to your lawyer at the station, Mr. Thompson. Ruiz interrupted coldly, his voice now official and merciless. Step aside. The technicians moved with silent, methodical efficiency. In the garage, the application of luminol reagent revealed what gallons of bleach and frantic cleaning had attempted to erase. It wasn't just faint outlines, but a ghostly, sprawling constellation of fluorescent, chilling blue-green blood spatter under the black light, on the concrete floor and the lower part of the wall near the sink. A silent, damning map of Maria's final violence. In the stifling, dusty heat of the attic, nestled deep under a thick layer of pink fiberglass insulation near the access panel, they found a small, sturdy metal box, the key to which was discovered, after a painstaking search, hidden in a hollow leg of Andre's workbench downstairs. Inside, laid out with chilling neatness and order, was Andre's grotesque trophy collection. Maria's simple gold engagement ring, a lock of her dark, wavy hair tied with a thin red ribbon, her driver's license, the photo showing her vibrant, lively smile, a mocking ghost, and a small, black leather-bound notebook, its pages filled with Andre's precise, neat, almost elegant handwriting. The notebook revealed the truth with terrifying, sickening swiftness, a truth far vaster and more monstrous than Clara could have imagined. It contained dates spanning nearly 15 years. Names of women: Susan M., Janet T., Lisa R., locations: Albuquerque, Durango, Flagstaff. And next to each name, brief, chilling annotations: too loud, asked too many questions, tried to leave, cold cases, missing women in 3 states, suddenly clicked into place, finding a horrific point of convergence. Laura Thompson. He wasn't just Maria's killer. He was a nomadic serial predator, a ghost who had perfected his charismatic, helpful persona into his most effective weapon, his most impenetrable shield. He moved from town to town, charming communities, embedding himself like a knife in a butter, selecting his victims, then making their bodies disappear, often through the efficient anonymity of municipal waste disposal systems, when they threatened his control or, like Maria, tried to escape. He was a monster hiding in plain sight, celebrated as a hero. And it was Laura, a silent, terrified little girl, holding a fragment of unbearable, too heavy truth in her heart, who had finally, miraculously, brought his long, bloody reign of terror to an end. Andre was arrested on his perfectly mowed lawn, in front of the cheerful petunias, the mask of civility and grief finally crumbling to reveal the pure, spitting rage beneath as the cold steel of handcuffs snapped onto his wrists. "You don't understand," he shrieked, his voice raw and guttural, struggling with surprising strength against the officers holding him. Saliva flew from his lips. "She was mine. Maria was mine. She had no right. She was trying to steal Laura, to steal everything. She forced me to do it. It's her fault." The entire neighborhood, drawn by the flashing lights and screams, watched from their porches and windows in stunned, horrified disbelief. Their golden boy, their local hero, exposed as a monster of unimaginable, cold, calculating evil. The little bright red mailbox seemed to snicker, a grotesque exclamation point under the relentless afternoon sun.